How's it going, everybody? I'm Evo from the Lineman Lounge, and we're continuing our series with another episode of the NFL offseason and overlook for 32 teams in the NFL. If you don't know what's going on, basically the 2023-24 season is done for a majority of the teams out there, with the big game coming up uh, very shortly. But for 30 of the NFL's franchises and their fan bases, they're looking forward to next season already, with most of those teams starting their de facto offseason already. I figured it's a good opportunity for us to take a quick and concise look at each of the teams in the NFL, where they're at heading into the offseason, and doing a little bit of legwork for you guys, the casual fans, so that way, if you think that player X should go to team Y, and you just kind of throw that out there without any other context, you're not going to look like a complete buffoon. Because I know that I've done that in the past. There's a lot of things that go into each team's off seasons: cap space, pending free agents, how they were on each side of the ball the previous season, coaching changes, things like that. And so today we're going to be going over another division here in the NFL, and it's going to be the NFC South. So with that, let's get into it. All right, starting here with the NFC South, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the Bucks finished the 2023 season with a 9-8 record. Offensively, they ranked 21st. Defensively, they ranked 24th according to PFF. And overall, it wasn't that bad of a year. Good enough year that they were able to get into the playoffs. But it's not as simple as that. I mean, the Bucks won the contest of being the worst NFC team to make the playoffs, other than the Packers, uh, by beating out the other bad teams in the NFC South. They were just the best of the worst, and that's not necessarily a title that you want to hear all the time. Um, his team was kind of expected to have a steep and dramatic drop off when Tom Brady left. You know, once the GOAT is off your team, you can expect there to be some problems. They brought in Baker Mayfield season, and he actually had a pretty darn good year statistically, especially playing away from home, oddly enough. But he played himself into a good contract this offseason, more than likely. Something probably pretty close to what Geno Smith got. Not top end of the league. We're not talking in that $40 million a year range, but the 25, maybe top end 30 mil a year range for a couple years, just to see if he still has what it takes to consistently go out there and lead a team to victory. That being said, the same concerns from before are still present with this team. They are aging. They've got some talented free agents that could possibly be leaving, specifically Mike Evans and Levante David. So, looking at this team pending free agents right now, Mike Evans is set to be a free agent. He's already come out and talked about wanting upwards of 30 mil per year annual average value. And for a wide receiver who is really damn good, he's getting up there in years. He's nearly 30 years old. That's a tough ask, especially when you have seen some decline in play. I mean, he's still a perennial 1,000-yard receiver, looking at double-digit style touchdowns each year, and he could be a huge piece to a team. But for the Bucks to lose him and basically get nothing other than a comp pick in return, that would be really tough. He was actually someone that I said that the Bucks last season should have looked to try to deal him away, to get some extra draft capital, help draft in a very strong wide receiver draft like this year, and clear some of that cap off the books. Where as of right now, they're just gonna possibly lose him and get nothing back from it, nothing of substance at least. But beyond him, you also have linebacker Devin White, linebacker Levante David, who's been a stalwart there for this team for years. He's played his whole career here with them. Baker Mayfield is a free agent, and that's probably the biggest part of their offseason. You also have defensive tackle Greg Gaines, free safety Antoine Winfield Jr., and running back Chase Edmonds. All right. And we'll jump to another name on this list here, Antoine Winfield Jr., one of the best, if not the best, safeties in the league right now, with multiple flexibilities. He can play in the slot, he can play corner, he can play either safety position. The guy is amazing, just like his dad. And he's coming off this rookie contract. They could try to franchise tag him. The franchise tag for safeties isn't that bad, but really, do you want to do that to a young player who is one of the most impactful players on your defense and in the secondary? And a secondary that isn't as good as it really should be with some of the names and some of the signings that they've made. He is a top priority to return to this team, and it's really going to be rough for them if they allow him to walk. That being said, the Bucks, as of right now, are expected to have an effective cap space of 35.2 million. So not too bad, but when you start factoring in some deals for guys like a Baker Mayfield and an Antoine Winfield, which they can backload a lot of this, that cap space is going to dwindle pretty quick. Team needs, they need edge rush help. They will probably need wide receiver help because with Mike Evans most likely walking away from this team and taking a contract somewhere else, you also have Chris Godwin there, who he's no spring chicken. And then you have a bunch of other Jags at wide receiver. So not a great outlook for passing options there long term as of right now. Quarterback definitely still can be a team need. If they don't get Baker Mayfield, it skyrockets at the top of the list. If they do keep Baker, it still would behoove them to look forward to the future and possibly try to get some sort of a long-term solution, a developmental prospect, someone in the middle rounds potentially of this draft that they could try to mold into a guy that starts 2 years from now, 3 years from now. They could also use help at offensive tackle, tight end, and interior offensive line. This again is a team. They were 9-8. They did win the NFC South, but it was a very close race to the end. And I wouldn't necessarily say that they were that much better than a lot of the other teams here in the NFC South, barring at least one of these teams, which is just in purgatory. Um, the Buccaneers, because they did make the playoffs, they have a later pick this year. They picked number 26, and they have 6 total draft picks. Another thing that is kind of looking down for the Buccaneers, their offensive coordinator, who has looked pretty darn good and made Baker Mayfield look really good, was Dave Canales, and he has left. He is now the head coach of the Carolina Panthers, so jumped within the division to become the head coach there for the Panthers. And that is a tough one, a tough loss for the Buccaneers. But can you blame a guy for taking a deal that's basically getting him paid over the long term? I kind of can't. But we'll get to that Panthers team here in just a little bit. Either way, it is not a sure thing that Baker comes in and re-signs with the Bucks. I feel like he probably wants to. He feels some sort of way about the Bucks for them bringing him in and giving him a chance, a shot to start. But if he walks, you're left with Kyle Trask, and that's real tough. And Baker could opt to leave because his guy Dave Canales is no longer there. Alex Van Pelt is the new OC there, I believe. He's the office coordinator up in Cleveland. So we could see a big step back there in offense for the Bucks, but it's really going to hinge around what they're doing with Baker Mayfield. And I think it would be an absolute loss for this team if they let Antoine Winfield walk as well. All right, next team up, we're going to be going to the New Orleans Saints. So New Orleans Saints, same thing every year. They're in cap hell. They like to kick the can down the road with dead money, with void years, things like that. And it's no different going into this offseason. As a Saints fan, I would be so tired of having to put up with this every offseason. Saints ended the year also 9-8, but lost in the tiebreakers to losses to the Buccaneers. Uh, as of right now, the expected effective cap space for the Saints is 87.7 million in the negative. So that is after adjustments of certain things, this effective cap space of negative 87.7 million. It's insane. It is the worst in the league. They are in cap hell. They've been in cap hell, and they have to get this even by the start of the new league year. And that unfortunately is probably going to mean more bad roster choices as far as pumping contracts in the future. Some of the issues on your team are going to have to persist just out of necessity. Looking at you, quarterback situation. But other than that, I mean, offensively, they were ranked 16th, and defensively, they were ranked 10th. They did ship their offensive coordinator out of town, who's been a longtime guy there back since Sean Payton was the head coach. Um, but this team, they have a very solid defense, but they're gonna honestly have to start looking at guys on that side of the ball, and and can they retain them on some of their contracts, especially older guys like a Cam Jordan, who's been a stalwart there for years for them. He's getting up there in age, and his production is down a little bit. And he's getting, you know, paid a lot of money. And he's even talked about he doesn't know what his future holds there just because he understands the cap situation that they have and knows that at some point the numbers aren't going to work out. Um, this was also an interesting team to me because they did not get rid of their head coach and Dennis Allen. Um, at the end of the year, the team kind of had a mutiny against him, not directly against him, but they just didn't follow his orders and looked like a bunch of a-holes to the Atlanta Falcons and their former head coach Arthur Smith, and kind of ran up the score on him in a dirty way. Um, this would have been a good year for them to move on from him. That being said, I almost feel like this might be a year where the Saints say, we got to take our licks. We got to drop a lot of players. We got to get our team cap compliant. We are going to probably end up resulting in a super high draft pick because of all this, because we're not going to have a good record. And then they can ship off Dennis Allen, say thanks for your service in allowing us to tank this year, and bring in a head coach that and potentially a new GM situation where they can try to right the ship. Um, but yeah, like I said, they're going to have to look at some big names. Cam Jordan, Marcus Lattimore, they could be victims as well of this cap purgatory. And then big thing here, Derek Carr, he sustained some injuries this year. Just a couple years ago when he was with the Raiders, he was being talked about as an MVP candidate, having an MVP South season, and we just haven't seen that since. Obviously, it got him shipped out of town and brought over to the Saints, and he's just not looked good there. They've had to put Jameis Winston in here and there, mostly due to injuries. But I mean, the production sometimes was better with Jameis or sometimes the same. Um, Regardless, the contract that they gave Carr is not something they can get out of. And in reality, they're going to be tied to him probably for another 2 years because they're going to have to adjust his contract and modify it, pushing a lot of that money into future years. And that's just tough as a Saints fan because quarterback is a need for them for sure. I don't think Derek Carr is the answer there, even if they put more pieces around him. I mean, Chris Olave is great, but he can't be the only one. Um, so you're kind of stuck with them. It's just kind of a shit situation. If there is one team that really needs to tank here this year, it is probably the Saints. And it is just to help get cap compliant, help get bad contracts off the books, and try to create a fresh start, break it down to the studs, break it down to the foundation for a new head coach and a new regime here. Another thing that kind of sucks for them, Ryan Ramczyk, if you aren't tracking, he is having some issues with the knee where it's basically bone on bone at this point. There are talks of him possibly having to medically retire. He's been a very solid right tackle in this league for years, but after suffering these injuries this year and just the wear and tear in his body, it might be it for him. Now, pending free agents for this team, you have offensive tackle and guard Andrews Pete, quarterback James Winston, Jimmy Graham, who ended up coming back and not doing a whole lot for him, guard Trey Turner, guard Max Garcia, and tackle Cam Irving. So that offensive line, a lot of guys walking. Those are names that you probably recognize, but they are older names. Max Garcia being, I believe, the youngest out of that group, and a higher draft pick, maybe a second round draft pick that showed a little bit of promise initially, and then it's kind of has been bad since. So not a ton of big name pending free agents other than names that you might recognize, but still guys that were, active participants as starters on game day that are no longer going to be there. And that's just going to make it even tougher for Derek Carr to stay upright. Now, team needs, again, offensive line, offensive line, offensive line. In my opinion, that's one of their biggest needs. They also didn't have much of a pass rush, despite having the 10th ranked defense. They didn't have a great pass rush, and that really starts at edge defender. They have no true pass rushing edge rushers right now. Wide receiver, adding to that offense, getting someone opposite of Chris Olave, other than a Michael Thomas, who probably will be gone this year, would be a smart idea. Regular defensive linemen are a need. Tight end, sorry, Taysom Hill ain't the answer, and the Broncos are probably going to be watching what happens with him because, again, cap casualty. They gave him an unrealistic contract to be a hybrid tight end, uh, halfback, fullback, quarterback, whatever gadget guy. Is kind of ridiculous. And then, of course, quarterback. If someone like the Saints wants to take a flyer on a mid-round guy, a Spencer Rattler or something, they could go for that and hopefully have someone developed in 2 to 3 years to take over this team when they can try to get out of Derek Carr's contract. Um, this team does have the 14th overall pick, which is nice. That does put them in a position where they could potentially look at one of those first round style quarterbacks, albeit I wouldn't go for it because I don't think that any one of Bo Nix, Michael Penix, or JJ McCarthy is worth a pick that high in the first round, unless it's truly your guy. They can go for it. But I feel like, again, this team won't say it publicly, but I think that they know that they are up shit's creek and they just kind of need to let things run their course this year, and it's not going to be pretty. Um, Other bad news for them, they only have 5 total picks in this draft, so they're not going to be necessarily having an injection of youth through the draft, which that's one of the ways that you kind of help yourself get cap compliant and stay relatively competitive is bringing in a lot of young guys, having them replace old guys, and developing them. It's gonna be tough to do that this year. So, things not looking too hot for the New Orleans Saints. Next up, not to say it's getting worse, but maybe it's getting worse. We got the Carolina Panthers, who we've talked about this on the show many times. Worst ownership group in the league now that Dan Snyder is out. David Tepper is a clown. I am willing to say that directly. He's a clown. The way that he is acting, the way that he is not allowing his team to develop, it's a recipe for failure. It's absolutely a recipe for failure. The coaching staff that he brought in this year, I was generally a fan of. I didn't think that they were going to have success this year, but I thought that you let things run its course, let these guys develop your first overall pick quarterback in Bryce Young, and maybe start evaluating a little bit more next year. But it seems like David Tepper wants to give everyone a 1 year leash at most, and then move on from them. Matt Rule had the most run with this team, and it wasn't very good. And I understand moving on from Matt Rule, but then you also look at the contract that he was given and how much money he's still getting paid to not be the coach of that team. And that it amazes me how rich David Tepper is with how he just kind of throws money around like that. Probably didn't even make a dent. It's just millions and millions down the toilet essentially. Either way, Panthers in the year 2-15, 2 more wins than you really would have thought they would have had based on how they played this year. Offensively, they were ranked 30th according to PFF. Defensively, they were tied for 15th, and that's because they do have some decent defensive players, or at least had some decent defensive players. They've got guys that are pending free agents this year that they're really going to matter. Cornerback CJ Henderson, wide receiver DJ Shark, Frankie Luvu, who at linebacker, starter, cornerback Shaq Griffin, big one here. Defensive end Brian Burns, defensive end Yetter Gross Matos, wide receiver LaVishka Chenault, safety Jeremy Chin, and guard Gabe Jackson. They have other free agents, but these are some of the big names. And the biggest one out of that is Brian Burns. He is one of the better defensive ends in this league, especially as a rush end. Um, he is someone that there have been talks about potentially trading him away because his contract was expiring. I don't see any way that Brian Burns wants to stay here in this dumpster fire. So they could throw all the money they want to at him cap wise. I still think he's going to turn it down. I think the only way that they're able to keep him in house is by using a franchise tag, and it's going to be steep for a defensive end in general. As of right now, they have positive 26.5 million in expected effective cap space. Not great, but not terrible. They can work a little bit with that, and I'm sure that they can make some more money appear there because the cap is kind of a myth. But that being said, it is going to be a tough situation for uh, GM Dan Morgan, yes, former linebacker for the Carolina Panthers, Dan Morgan, who was the assistant GM last year and has really shot up the ranks quickly. It's going to be a tough spot for him to be in. He's really going to be put to the test immediately to see, are they hiring a guy just because he has NFL background and acumen as a player, a la John Lynch and things like that, or is he up to the task and he was promoted so quickly through the ranks because he actually deserves it? I honestly don't know, but we're about to find out. Because if things don't work out well this year, Dan Morgan might be out the door next year. Same with new head coach Dave Canales. He might be out the door next year if things don't go well. And for all intents and purposes, I'm not too sure that it is going to go well. As of right now, they need wide receiver, they need cornerback, defensive line, edge rusher, especially if Brian Burns walks, safety, and offensive tackle. They have 6 total draft picks. They do not have a first round pick because they traded that to move up in the first last year to select Bryce Young. The the book still isn't written for Bryce Young, but this year did not look good. His stock is not looking great. They're going to be hamstrung by the cap to an extent, but again, you franchise tag Brian Burns, your best defensive player, and things are going to be very tight. And I could see him holding out as well. Um, until this team is willing to devote to a full rebuild at this point, or until they're willing to devote towards keeping a head coach and GM for 3 or more years, or until David Tepper is gone, it's going to be a tough one for this team. I mean, I really thought that they were going to have a somewhat positive year, maybe get closer to 4 to 6 wins. Wasn't in the cards, and I don't know that it's going to be going forward anytime soon. Other than the pending free agents that they do have some solid players, especially on the defensive side, hence why they were tied for 15th in the league according to PFF. Look for them to possibly start trading some of those guys, get extra draft capital, try to build a youth movement there, try to get a little bit more cap space. It's a team that could be poached from, and we'll see if Dan Morgan is willing to make those difficult decisions because a lot of those difficult decisions are going to have to be made. All right. Lastly, we have the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta Falcons finished the year 7-10. Uh, they were the 18th ranked offense and the 12th ranked defense. A nice little boost in defense there from bringing in a new defensive coordinator. But hey, Arthur Smith is gone along with his staff. And I like Arthur Smith. I do. I like him to an extent as an offensive coordinator. I don't really like him as a play caller. Um, what a mismanagement of offensive assets on this team. This record easily could have been flipped from a 7-10 to a 10-7 type team if they had properly managed their offensive assets, namely your top end first pick, Bijan Robinson. The guy is an absolute stud. We saw that in college. We saw that early in the season. And we saw that here and there through games. The reason why we didn't see it from him a ton isn't because he isn't talented or isn't living up to the expectations. It's because they wouldn't put him on the damn field. And you're not going to win games if you're not playing your best players and giving your best players the ball. Uh, how how are you going to let your premier running back run like 7 times in a game and then not play a game, not due to any real injury, to the point of you getting investigated to say why wasn't he put on the injury report? Um, with that sort of action happening, it's no surprise that Arthur Smith was let go. Uh, they did get a pretty darn good coach there in Raheem Morris. He's a fan, or I'm a fan of his, I should say. He has both experience on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, but most recently as the defensive coordinator for the LA Rams. He's done really good things there. He's got a lot of players coming out saying good things about him, and I think that that bodes really well overall for this team. Like that is a step in the right direction. And based on their defensive play last year, along with having those offensive weapons, possibly minus quarterback as of right now, they are a team poised to make a big jump and probably take over this NFC South next year. If I had to way early prediction, say who's going to win the NFC South, it would be the Falcons, just based on the moves that they can or should make this offseason. So as of right now, they have an expected 20 million in cap space. More to probably come, but as we know, cap is a myth, and there are some quarterback options out there for him if you really think that they're a quarterback away from having a pretty competent offense and obviously a average to above average defense. Now, as of right now, penny free agents, cornerback Jeff Okuda, he was brought in from the Lions. Defensive lineman Calais Campbell, who is great, but he's also like what, almost 40 years old at this point. Running back slash wide receiver slash gadget player Cordell Patterson, who love CP, but he's getting up there in years. And when you have a running back room that includes Bijan Robinson, uh, you're not as needed as you probably once were. Edge rusher Bud Dupree, wide receiver Van Jefferson, and wide receiver Mac Hollins. That basically leaves you with Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan Robinson on offense as your main dudes, and that is a super solid start. Their offensive line, quietly one of the better offensive lines in the NFL, and a lot of that comes from Arthur Smith and his coaching. He is uh, a meat and potatoes, run the ball type of guy, have good trench play, and he got that good trench play out of his team. And then he kind of abandoned what he was good at, which was running the ball with good running backs. I don't know how else to put it. When you have a line like that and you're not running Bijan, it's a problem. At quarterback, Taylor Heineke and kid from Cincinnati, who I was a fan of, they just weren't getting it done. But I put part of that blame on Arthur Smith and their offensive play calling. Um, you could take a lot of pressure off of them by giving the ball to your running back, and that running game is going to open up options in the passing game for you. And they just avoided doing that. Regardless, quarterback is probably their top need on this team, followed closely by edge rush help. Despite being the 12th ranked defense, they didn't have a lot of pass rush. That defense could use a pure edge rusher. Wide receiver is going to also be a need to go opposite of Drake London with Van Jefferson and Mac Hollins both leaving. Maybe you will see a bit of an uptick in production from Kyle Pitts as well, because we all know what Kyle Pitts was when he came out. He's much more of a wide receiver than a tight end, just a big wide receiver. And he's been misutilized or underutilized ever since going there to the Falcons. They could also use some depth on quarterback, cornerback, and defensive line. Oof, this is making me sad because this team could be really good offensively. And it just seems like Arthur Smith fumbled the bag. Good news, Falcons fans, though. You have the eighth overall pick. You also have between 8 and 9 total picks. As we talked about before in a previous episode of the series, Calvin Ridley suspended due to gambling, traded to the Jacksonville Jaguars. If the Jacksonville Jaguars re-sign him this offseason, you're getting another second round pick. I don't think it's a smart move for the Jacksonville Jaguars to do that. So you're probably only going to have 8 picks, but 8 picks is more than the 7 that you're originally allotted. Now, if Jags are dumb enough to bring him back, another second round pick is going to be very helpful if you want to go after a quarterback in the second round of the draft. If you want to package picks up and move up in the draft to try to get a guy, or they could look to some of the free agent quarterbacks that could potentially be out there, or trading for a quarterback like Justin Fields. Early on in the offseason, Justin Fields to the Falcons was hot. It was a hot take. It seems like he could possibly be had for a second round pick and maybe some change. But the time of Justin Fields staying in Chicago is probably coming to an end. He's a dynamic running quarterback with improving play from his arm. But this could be his first chance to really be under like a competent offensive scheme, one with a lot of weapons. Even though Chicago's building something good up there in the north, it wouldn't be a bad spot for him to either flourish or really fall on his face. And then, he's on his 5th-year option right now, or the last year of his rookie deal, and you can get away with not re-signing him. Other options do include Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins is someone that is a pending free agent for my Minnesota Vikings, and there's a lot of reasons to think that he would be willing to come down here to Atlanta. Again, this team seems a little bit tailor-made to be a quarterback away from being a very competitive and playoff team. Also, he was married to his wife in the Atlanta area because her family is from there. His family actually is in Florida now, so it's a much closer location than being up in the Michigan and Minnesota area. And Arthur Blank is the type of owner that he is going to be willing to pump money into things and make the big trades, take big shots, do whatever he can to win a championship. And so going after a guy who might be pricing himself out a little bit of certain locations in Kirk Cousins, they could definitely take that shot because being a quarterback away from a strong playoff run is something that probably is on the radar of Arthur Blank and his front office. So don't be surprised if they look at options like that this offseason. And a sneaky one, reckless speculation that I've brought up on the show before, Geno Smith. Geno Smith absolutely could be traded this offseason. It is an option for Seattle to move on from him, start a bit of a rebuild there. And Geno Smith has shown to be at least an average game manager type of quarterback that can competently run an offense. And that's what this team needs is someone who can go out there and competently run an offense and sling the ball around a little bit. And with that, we're done with the NFC South. So thank you for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe this video. Comment, let me know how I'm doing. If you are a fan of any of these teams or have any thoughts about any of these teams in their off seasons, please let me and the rest of the Lineman Lounge know what you think so that way we can get everyone's opinions and thoughts on the NFC South. But until next time, I'm Evo. Catch you later.